Welcome to the Cocktail Guru Podcast,
a show about food, drink, and entertainment,
with a tight focus on the good life,
and all things delicious, luxurious, and fun.
I'm Jonathan Pogash, bartender, author, TV personality, and founder of the Cocktail Guru.
And I'm Jeffrey Pogash, wine and spirits professional, author, insatiable collector of culinary ephemera, and so people tell me, an engaging raconteur.
And my dad. Well, Dad, I like that shirt. I like that shirt of yours, Dad. It looks like a new shirt, is it not?
Thank you, John. It's virtually new because I haven't worn it. I think I wore it once before. For one of our podcasts.
Now it's coming back.
So it's, for all intents and purposes, a brand
new.
But
do you like this hat that I'm wearing? For those of you who can see,
I do. It's a snazzy hat.
Yep, it says the Cocktail Guru on it. So it's a cocktail.
It says the Cocktail.
It's a Cocktail
Guru. Of course.
This is a new shop that we have on thecocktailguru.com where you can get these cool swag merchandise items and this water bottle thingamajigger, other stuff. Yeah, I know. We'll have a link on it. Thanks.
I like that.
We'll have a link on it so people can check it out.
I need one.
Okay,
of those.
I'll do my best for a holiday gift for you.
Great.
Sound good? What do you,
Thank you.
I have a little drink in my hand that I thought I would sip during this episode.
Yes, and it's in honor of our guest today, just as my drink is. I am drinking something that is listed in the book of our next guest. It's called the Gold Rush. The recipe is in the book. I love this book, which we will tell you about in a minute, because it's not only full of great information, but it's also full of recipes, great recipes that you can reproduce very easily at home. And
hold on,
our next guest is someone. I want to tell you what I'm drinking because it's not fair. So let me. You know what? Let me sip.
Please continue to sip because I have something that I'm sipping on, which is some green chartreuse.
I'm jumping way ahead. And chartreuse, as we will discuss, is very important too. I said chartreuse is very important to this entire conversation. So we will discuss it in greater detail.
Well, what do we have on the show? Who do we have on the show today, Dad? Are you gonna talk?
Well, I'm going to keep you guessing for a minute or two, but our next guest is someone I have known for a very long time. I have even traveled with him. He makes a great travel companion. He's a respected spirits and cocktail writer. And as I said, a great travel companion. He has written for a host of publications, diverse set of publications, from Details to Saveur to, believe it or not, Popular Science. That's right, Popular Science. He is author of Perfect Tonic, a book, and another book called Party Like a Rock Star, Even When You're Poor as Dirt, which I believe harkens back to his days as a computer programmer when he lost his job and then had to find ways to save money, but still enjoy himself along the way. That's a topic we will explore as well. His most recent book is this one called Doctors and Distillers.
It really is.
It's an incredible book, Doctors and Distillers. It's a remarkable medicinal history of beer, wine, spirits, cocktails. It's a fascinating look at medicine and its relationship to alcoholic beverages.
And we'll bring on our guest just right after this. What better way to show that cocktail or mocktail lover in your family that you really care this holiday season than with a Cocktail Guru certified 100% cotton hoodie or a fashionable snapback baseball cap. The new Cocktail Guru shop has all of your holiday gift needs right there in one spot. It's, shall we say, a one-stop shop for things like bar tools, wearables, full cocktail box kits, and more. We're even offering a special 10% off holiday season discount with the code HOLIDAY22. But this offer only lasts through January 31st. So head on over to shop.thecocktailguru.com to peruse our offerings. That's shop.thecocktailguru.com. 10% off with code HOLIDAY22. Cheers and happy holidays.
And we are back with our guest. Let us welcome to the Cocktail Guru podcast stage, Mr. Camper English.
Camper English. Welcome, Camper.
Hey, what's up?
Camper, I started off by saying that you were once a computer programmer. Could you tell us about that and how you evolved from a computer programmer to a spirits and cocktail writer?
Well, sure. Well, that was the computer programmer was my second career, actually. The first one, I studied physics in college, and then I did some research work in hospital settings for several years, doing research in the MRI department for a while. And then I decided I wanted more computer skills, so I became a software engineer. And then in 2001, the economic collapse of one of several that we've gone through since then, I was unemployed, and I was still living the high life, though, going out all the time and getting drinks and stuff like that. So I wrote this, in retrospect, very silly little book about how to live the rock star lifestyle on a low budget. And you're one of the few people who still remembers that book, that it exists. And since then, I moved into writing. I was started with reviews of like bars and clubs. And when I was unemployed, and eventually I realized, I'm making all my money as a writer. I guess I'm a writer now. And so I stopped trying to get a new software job, and went into writing full time. And that's more than 15 years, almost 20 years ago now. That happened. So I've just been nerding out on cocktails ever since.
And Camper, speaking of nerding out, you are, we're all nerds at everything. We're all geeks about something, but you are very, very nerdy when it comes to the science of liquids and cocktails and mixology. And really, I think you definitely gained popularity as kind of one of the foremost experts in that field. When you started working on ice and studying ice, I think, and also studying specific ingredients that are potentially dangerous to consume. So how did you get into kind of the nerdiness, the geekiness behind the scientific aspect of cocktails and liquids?
Well, I think part of it was I'm just an interested person, and you can write about what other people are doing all day long. But at some point, I got to get my hands dirty and start trying to make some of the cocktails and do some of the stuff the bartenders were doing that I was writing about. So when the ice stuff came about, I basically applied the scientific method to the theory of how to make clear ice, boil the water or freeze it twice and things like that. And eventually figured out an easy way to make ice with no special machinery at home. And from that point on, a lot of other writers got interested in writing about cocktails and spirits. And then there became sort of a need to specialize a little bit. Am I writing about trends all the time or this and that? But since I had a background in science, I decided to more look at that. I was interested in anyway, and I could read some of the scientific literature on anything from clear ice to ingredients that might be dangerous, and interpret those to try to push the envelope forward.
Oh, one thing I forgot to ask you. We always ask our guests what their desert island drink is, like desert island cocktail or drink. What is yours, Camper English?
Well, gosh, my favorite drink to nerd out on is the Mai Tai. I'm not sure if I want that on a desert island. It's a little bit cliche. It's all too tropical on my desert island. But
it's one of my favorite drinks too. It's great. Right.
Okay, good. Yeah, the Mai Tai is a good choice. But I was thinking, as I'm reading this book and as I'm thinking about your past experiences with science and what you've written about cocktails and ingredients, for those who may not know, there are many ingredients out there that are readily available, but it may not necessarily be that great for you to consume or think about getting online, things like that. So, for instance, quinine. How about you can? I think you can readily order quinine powder online for use in making your own tonic water. But how safe is that?
Well, the quinine that's in if you were going to make homemade tonic syrup to make tonic water, the quinine itself and other cinchona alkaloids, as they call, they're regulated, they're limited. The trouble is in all of ingredients that are similar to that is that if you're just a person at home and you don't have any information about, well, how much quinine is per ounce of this bark, you're going to make something and you're not going to know at the end if you're within safe limits or not. So the problem is the lack of being able to measure it. If you were going to make a product and sell it, now you could send it to a lab and it would be worth the money for that. And legally you would have to ensure that you had a safe product. And when we're fooling around with stuff at home, and that includes the quinine as well as things like wormwood, you can just buy at the herb store, but you might be reaching unsafe levels of the thujone in the case of wormwood, or the quinine in the case of the cinchona tree bark. And so from like a practical perspective, most people get into trouble and they do get sick from experimenting with cinchona tree bark for the tonic water, because it can build up in your system and it can cause things from like swelling and things that feel like a hangover to, in extreme cases, things like a heart attack, which we really don't want. Ooh. So it's about being conservative with it. I prefer a clear tonic water in the first place rather than this brown barky thing that people are making at home. Though I have experimented with it at first.
And there's so many really good tonic waters out there. Why not just buy some tonic and add it to your gin and have a great cocktail?
Yeah, ultimately the carbonation is not going to be as great with your homemade tonic syrup as it is with a bottled tonic water. So there are some ingredients that you have to ask yourself, like, do I need to make this myself? Can I do a better job than Fever Tree or Q Tonic or another premium brand? And if the answer is no, it's just homemade, but it's not better, then maybe that's a great justification in addition to the safety factor for buying a commercial product.
Yeah, well, let's get into a discussion about the medicinal properties of different spirits and spices and herbs. That's a fascinating part of your book, as well as the alchemy connection, alchemists and alcohol, spirits. Fantastic subject. I found something, if I might add, before we get into this, a section of a book which I have behind me called The Woman's Dictionary and Encyclopedia, given to us by a friend who was from the West Coast. His name was Brian, and Brian was a great bartender and mixologist, and he so kindly gave me this book, and it has a cure in it for an abscess. And it's called, the root is called the Greek valerian. I think it's better known as bluebells or sweet root. And it's a plant with fibrous roots and small blue flowers appearing during the season. And it says in this book, to cleanse the blood, make a tincture in whiskey, a dose being 1/2 wine glass full 3 times a day. Used in deconcoction for lung troubles, a small handful of the crushed root is steeped in 3 pints of water. 1/2 a teacup full is given every 4 hours, is to be taken every 4 hours. So those are some of the things that I have found, and all old 19th century and early 20th century books have these recipes for medicinal cures using spirits and herbs and spices.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The frontier medicine, as I like to think of rounding all those into it, it starts with there's always whiskey involved for the most part in America after a certain time period. Before that, it was rum or French brandy. But if we think about it today, herbal medicine, it's like step one, take the herb and put it in alcohol. What alcohol does is it extracts and preserves the active compounds in plants that we're trying to use. And that's been the case since before distilled spirits. People would just use wine or beer to do something similar. However, as we all know here, when you distill something, you can further preserve it. Even if you're distilling with water, a lot of the plants to make, say, rose water, now you have a preserved active essence of rose that's not going to spoil and can last beyond the season when a rose is in bloom. So a lot of the early medicine started out as water distillations, and then after we figured out how to distill wine, and to this day we still find alcohol useful as something to absorb and preserve the active components of plants. So as far as alcohol being useful in medicine, still is. Alcohol is it's a preservative, and it's an microbic. It kills all little nasties, and it's in your hand sanitizer. And so I think the difference is now we talk about alcohol being useful in medicine, whereas before alcohol was considered medicine directly a bit more than it is now.
So one thing I wanted to mention about your book, Camper, is that it reads really, really well, and it's a very easy read. You know, you think about a lot of the terminology and references and whatnot, and think, you know, well, maybe it's a little tough to get through, but it's one of the easiest books I've been able to get through, believe it or not. And unfortunately, I didn't get to finish it. I'm about halfway through, but we just got the hardcover copy, or the hard copy book a few days ago. But some of the most fascinating stuff in here has to do with what they were doing during sort of ancient times, and in early parts of the last century, using things like skulls and mummies in medicine, and essentially infused into alcoholic medicine. Also, another funny thing, Camper, maybe you could, I'm sure you could speak to this, that it could potentially they may have been using actual mummy and distilling it because of a typo in a recipe.
Yeah, it's a wild story. So it seems to be the case. So mummy medicine was huge going back. Started probably in the era of the Greeks and Romans, but it became very popular after distillation and say the 1400s all the way into almost 1800s. People were using parts of mummy flesh in medicine. And one of the most important books on distillation from the 1650s has a recipe right in there about how to use it. But at that point, they had used up most of the Egyptian mummies that were supposed to be the best type of mummies to use for medicine. The whole thing goes back to, it appears that there's a pitch, like a tar, that was not all that often found on the surface level of the ground. It's sort of like if oil was on the surface, that's pretty rare. You have to dig for it. And there was a pitch used in the embalming process. And so that would go into the mummies. And when people wanted to use this pitch for medicine, they would use a mummy because you could harvest the pitch from the mummy because it was the embalming fluid. And then as time went on, they kind of lost the connection that they were after the pitch from the mummy and not from the mummy itself. And so it became all about like the flesh of the mummy and not the tar that's inside of the mummy. And so people used up all the mummies in ancient Egypt, but if you couldn't get them, then you would try to get a traveler who died in the desert was your next best option. It was considered. And then if you couldn't get a hold of those, then there were some sort of mummy moonshiners preparing bodies to look like mummies to sell to apothecaries at the time. And then they would specify, if you're going to make this medicine from your corpse, then you'd want it to be a young person who was probably executed for a crime, because they would still be healthy in body, as a part of someone who died of natural causes as an old age, because they wouldn't have a healthy body. And it's an amazing several hundred-year period of using that in medicine, specifically to prevent bruises and infections after like falling off your horse. It seems like a very small, specific use for harvesting a human body.
Also, something that has always baffled me, but it became much clearer when I read your book, Doctors and Distillers, that's the use of resin in wine. Now, I've been drinking Retsina, Greek Retsina, for a long time, not necessarily enjoying it, but drinking it and wondering, why would anybody put resin in wine? And reading your book clarified that mystery, which was something I wasn't fully aware of. So maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, sure. It was the resin in the wine was really for two purposes. It had a medicinal purpose in the wine, and I think it was, if I remember correctly, to cure digestive issues, which a lot of the medicines in this mentioned in the book are, but also as a preservative. And we find that with a lot of the medicinal botanicals, they're also antibacterial. They're also help the wine or beer last longer, and that's definitely the case with the resin, as well as other resins are used to seal up the vessels that were used to transport wine. And so they were like sealant and medicine and preservative. And then by sealing with them, that would help preserve
all
them
in
further.
One.
Yeah.
Very useful. Very useful. 3 in 1. Fantastic. Also, a subject that I wanted to touch on, because it is so instrumental to the whole notion of making a cocktail. And this particular product was originally designed for curing stomach ailments, and that is bitters. Bitters, as in Angostura and Bokers, and how that came about, and how pharmacies.
Tough to get that one out, Dad.
Yes, pharmacists have played such a key role in the creation of bitters and other medicinal.
Before we talk
products.
more about that, I think you need a break, Dad, and we need a break. We'll be right back.
There's nothing better than the smell of coffee in the morning. What if you could enjoy a coffee subscription of fresh, roasted specialty coffee while making a difference in the lives of the farmers that grow it? What if you also had access to a virtual coffee community of other coffee lovers and the coffee farmer and roaster? That's all part of the Farm to Cup Coffee Club subscription at Unleashed Coffee. Subscribe today. UnleashedCoffee.com.
And now we're back. Camper Dad was asking about medicinal qualities of bitters and sort of how that came about, right, Dad? Is that right? Okay.
That's right.
So bitters come from really the era of the patent medicines or the snake oils. There's a line where they split off together, and then eventually some of those come into cocktail bitters and some of those go into soda syrups. There's another split off on the chain, and a lot of this takes place either mail order medicine or in the pharmacy. And so there's this long tradition that gets us to bitters, particularly Stoughton's bitters, which are no longer around today except for recreations, but they may have inspired the recipe for Campari. We've learned from research David Wondrich has done, as well as people would take them specifically in the morning to soothe the stomach after a night of drinking. And what that leads to is a little splash of bitters in with your whiskey and maybe a little sugar. That gets us the old fashioned. That's the original cocktail. before ice was in drinks, so in the early 1800s, you have your morning bracer. That's your glass of whiskey with a splash of water, a little sugar, and a dash of bitters to soothe the stomach and set you upon your day. So this drink we think of as being a sophisticated evening drink with a big ice cube in it that's cool was a warm breakfast drink to soothe your stomach before going to work. It's quite the different application of that medicine for the stomach, as well as quite a different use and time of day to be drinking a cocktail.
Yeah, really a hangover cure for the olden days, if you will. But also, I love. There's just so much to talk about that I just have a lot going on in my brain that I want to get out. But I don't want to miss talking about the influence of Christianity and monks specifically in creating medicines and alcoholic beverages that have supposed health benefits. You had, of course, the Trappists with beer production. Still today, you have the Carthusian monks for chartreuse specifically, and that I think is kind of what catapulted that style of beverage into the mainstream, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, absolutely. The monasteries were the centers of knowledge throughout medieval Europe, and more so than any local government or any local physician colleges, which were kind of rare and small at the time, and monks were going to those colleges as well. So for any community, and there might be a monastery somewhere in the community, that's where you would go if you were sick, if you needed something like a hospital or some sort of medicine. You go to the monastery / nunnery. When we say monasteries, we mean nuns as well. And there was a tradition of making beneficial medicines, and those are usually distilled medicines in this era, say after the 1400s, and those all-purpose medicines is really where we get chartreuse and probably Benedictine as well. And that let's take everything healthy and put it all together into this medicine. So it's a little bit like a daily health elixir, or if you had a specific condition, you might take more of it. And that's where we get these complex liqueurs with, say, 130 ingredients. And that tradition continued, and we see it in different form in Italy with all the bitter amari taking place, in that the monasteries had been producing these medicines, and then in that case, a lot of the churches were expelled, the monks were expelled. This also happened in the French Revolution, and then other people had to take over the job of producing beneficial medicines for the community. In Italy, we get all of the drinking bitters out of that tradition, and that they weren't often invented by monks, but invented by doctors in the wake of that. So today we get all this delicious stuff to drink, and it all comes from like a little daily spoonful of medicine in the morning and perhaps in the evening. But we just make cocktails with it, or you're sipping it neat right now.
So the monks were doctors and distillers. They really were.
They were indeed.
Or distiller doctors. Yeah.
And, there were quite a few people and brands that were making sort of bootleg versions of a lot of these. And I think people were really getting sick and dying from unregulated, or, I mean, essentially everything was unregulated at that time. I mean, very little was regulated in terms of dosage and whatnot.
Yeah, a lot was pre-regulation, and then after regulation happened, we find like known problems that then they could be tested, and we knew what was wrong with them. So there's always been bad medicine throughout all time. There's plenty of it mentioned in this book. And then as we get towards the 1900s, the Pure Food and Drug Act in America does its best to clean up all the false advertising that this basically 90% alcohol with wormwood in it is going to cure cancer and baldness and everything else. So that gets made illegal. And then, so everything's tidied up around the year 1900. And then 20 years later, Prohibition comes into place and makes alcohol illegal, except for medicinal alcohol. And then we have all of the moonshiners making often unsafe or trying to take denatured alcohol and renature it by redistilling it on the stovetop and selling that as consumable alcohol again. And so we get all this poison comes back on the market for people who are trying to consume alcohol. So there's the chapter that's essentially the prohibition chapter. I call it poison because it's really about being poisoned before safety regulations and then after prohibition. Both of those were horrible eras for drinking in America.
And you have other things, more what we might consider modern day spirits, tequila, mezcal. These were these were used for various ailments in their native countries.
Yeah, pretty much every spirit was used regionally in folk medicine, or I think we would call it traditional medicine is the more proper term today, in some way. So, for example, pretty much every culture has something you rub on a baby's gums when it's teething. And that, if you're from Jamaica, that is going to be rum. And if you're from America, that might be bourbon. And it might be brandy somewhere else in the world. So those traditions, I didn't cover in detail because it would just be endless lists of them. But in the time when people were trying to compare one spirit to another to figure out, oh, is this new rum stuff more healthy than brandy, which we know to be healthy, which is better for you? And so they would compare, like putting meat in a jar of each of brandy and rum, and whichever one rotted the meat more, that was going to be the worst for you. So then doctors would prescribe the other one. And that was the science of the day, to try to find out which was supposedly best for you. So brandy retained a reputation for being more medicinal than other spirits, but then whiskey took the throne for that later on, particularly in America, but specifically aged whiskey. And aged whiskey was considered to be more healthful for you than unaged whiskey.
We used cognac when Jonathan was teething. Yes, we put cognac on his gums from time to time when he was teething. And even at the very end of his mother's labor, just hours before Jonathan was born, the obstetrician who was practicing near us would say, we went 3 times that day, 3 or 4 times. He would say to my wife, go home and have a glass of cognac. That's what he would say to get her calm and ease her labor pains a little bit. And then finally, after the 4th trip, after having a little bit of cognac each time, Jonathan was born.
Thanks for that narrative.
So I think that explains a lot.
But moving on,
really
kind
does.
of bringing it back full circle, because what I think is interesting is the introduction of ice into mixed beverages and cocktails in the 1800s, and that kind of brings it back to one of your specialties, which is ice. But I think it's interesting where you mentioned that in 1880, Mark Twain actually commented on the lack of iced beverages. He said, Europeans say ice water impairs digestion. How do they know? They never drink anyway. They never drink any. I just think that is hilarious.
Yeah, and how that tradition continues to this day. Like, Americans are known across the world
to
for
this day.
wanting just excessive amount of ice in everyone else's opinion, and we think of it as like abundant, like that whole, you get your slushy at the gas station and it's just a whole thing full. It's more ice than a European consumes in a year in the one beverage. And it's interesting how many cultures think ice is bad for you. Cold beverages are unhealthy for digestion and avoid it for that reason. In other cultures, I've learned that it's not about that, but it's about, they like full strength beverages, and ice is seen as something that dilutes your soda. So they don't have a problem with cold soda, but soda with ice in it, that's the wrong way to go about it. So it's really interesting how people around the world view this very sort of fundamental thing in at least in American drinks, the ice cube.
Well, you're in kind of in conclusion. Obviously, we want to continue going on and on and on and talking to you, Camper, about your book. But for doctors and distillers, for your book, what is it? What's the key takeaway that you would like people to walk away with after they've read this book?
I think in general, if you read the book, you'll find that there are hundreds and hundreds of trivia and facts about the essential role that alcohol played in medicine and vice versa. But some interesting things to sort of reflect upon and consider was one, how distilled spirits that we drink today were formed purely in the context of making medicines. And there was no idea that you were going to distill wine and create a beverage to drink like wine. You were creating medicine. And so it was only a few hundred years later before we started drinking enough medicine to call them recreational beverages. So the birth of so much of what we enjoy today comes from making medicine. And secondly, how much the study of alcohol influenced medicine later on, and how the scientific theory. Fermentation in beer led in a long route to the understanding of the germ theory of disease. And by studying the difference between carbonated water and beer, people like Pasteur came up with the germ theory of disease, one of the most important concepts in all of medical history, and one of the correct ones, unlike what the Greeks were doing. So I think I hope it helps people sort of value the role of alcohol in history, and specifically with the history of medicine, a little bit more than most people do as of now.
Well, we're getting to the holidays, and this makes a great stocking stuffer for the cocktail spirit geek, medicine lover, anything really. And what's really cool also, Camper, is that this is chock full of information, and I could tell from the writing that you could expand on so many of these things, but you could not, because you want it to be in a kind of compact form. And I think there are many additional books within this book.
Oh yes, no question about that.
Yes, thanks for
and it's a very complex, it's a very complex subject or subjects written in an eminently readable form. It's just incredible how easy it is to read this book and how much fun it is at the same time, especially if you have a drink in your hand.
Exactly. And it's the gift that your dentist needs this holiday season.
Yes, it is. Yes, your dentist, your doctor, your obstetrician.
That's amazing.
Everybody.
Camper English, I have a drink in my hand. Dad has a drink in his hand. Cheers to you. Thank you for coming on the show, and we appreciate having you.
Cheers, Camper. Thank you very much. Pleasure having you.
It was great to see you guys again.
Tipple Time is brought to you in part by Perfect Purée of Napa Valley and Maison Ferrand.
Well, hello there again, Tipple Time friends. The Cocktail Guru podcast, Tipple Time segment. And this one happens to have Plantation, 5-year-old rum, and Perfect Purée of Napa Valley. The red jalapeno, oh my goodness, I taste it on my taste buds already. And it's kind of chilly outside, depending on where you are, obviously. And I love hot toddies at this time of the year. And you could play around. You can use all of these interesting flavors, and it really just runs the gamut. So stay with me here, friends. We're going to do a hot toddy with Plantation 5-year-old rum. And let me just tell you quickly about Plantation 5-year-old rum. It's from Barbados, aged for a minimum of 5 years in bourbon casks and cognac Ferrand cognac casks. So it's really lovely and special. So let's start right now. And we're going to add an ounce into our hot toddy mug right over here. I love these mugs. These are nice and classic. You may call it an Irish coffee mug, whatever. We're using this Perfect Purée of Napa Valley red jalapeno puree, and it is spicy, and it has this really beautiful color, and it's just great. And you may be like, wait a minute, Jonathan. Hold on just a second here, Jonathan. How is this going to work in a hot toddy drink? Well, my friends, you will see. And by see, I mean I will taste it for you. You can't taste it, but I will taste it for you, and I will let you know. I've already tasted it, guys.
Don't worry. What I'm doing here, oh my goodness, what I'm doing here is adding some honey syrup, and I did 3/4 of an ounce. This is just regular honey, equal parts with warm water, and I've diluted it, and you get this really nice mixable honey liquid. And what I'm going to do is just give this a little bit of a stir. Now, with the Perfect Purée, you can actually go to their website. If you're in the hospitality industry, you can request samples, and we're going to, of course, throw the link right down here where you can request samples. Here is my hot water, and we're just going to top that off with hot water. Give it a little bit of a stir again. I love this color, too. Very interesting, very unique for a toddy-style drink. And here is my garnish. Look at that. This is a cloved orange slice that I'm just going to add right to the rim. It's just a wheel, an orange wheel with some cloves stuck inside of it. This is like, it's really nice orange color, and I love it. It's just a really beautiful, and I smell that red jalapeno. Hold on one second. Let me give it a try. Oh, it really does have a nice kick, but that rum, really, the Plantation 5 year balances it all out. The honey syrup, you can monitor the spice level a little bit less if you don't want as much spice, a little bit more. Of course, we'll have that recipe available. Cheers, everyone. Yet again, another successful Tipple Time segment. Cheers.
Tipple Time is brought to you in part by Maison Ferrand and Perfect Purée of Napa Valley.
That does it for today's show. If you enjoy what we do, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also support the show with a small monthly donation to help sustain future episodes. Just click on the donate button at the top of our website and choose your donation amount. To learn more about future guests, visit www.thecocktailgurupodcast.com or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok.
The Cocktail Guru podcast is produced by First Reel Entertainment and distributed by EatsDrinksTV, a service of the Center for Culinary Culture, home of the Cocktail Collection, and is available via Anchor, Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.